Hello, this is Stephen Wallace, and this is my presentation, Symbols on Money. Here is some information about me. The short version is after college and service in the Army, I studied linguistics and got a PhD at Cornell. After teaching linguistics for several years, I got a law degree and worked as a corporate lawyer for many years. I'm now retired. This is what I look like. All right, I'm going to talk about symbols on money. And I'm going to start by asking, what is a symbol? Here's the definition of a symbol. A symbol is a mark, sign, or word that indicates, signifies, or is understood as representing an idea, object, or relationship. In simple terms, a symbol is a tangible item that refers to or goes in the direction of the meaning of something intangible. Anthropologists have studied symbols extensively, and here are some items that they have noted. First, symbols are complex means of communication. They work by condensation, and many symbols are saturated with emotion. And we can all recognize that human life and human behavior rely on and are based on many symbols. Let's look at some examples of symbols, starting with religions. First, there's Christianity with its symbol, the cross. Islam, their symbol is the crescent. Buddhism, the wheel of Dharma. And then there's Judaism with the Star of David. Governments have symbols. There to the left is the coat of arms of the royal family of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Windsor family, King Charles III and his relatives. It's rich in symbols. There in the center is a shield. Above the shield is a crown. There you have on the left and the right a lion and a unicorn. You have some legends. You have these various figures on the shield. I won't go into an analysis of what all these symbols mean, but it's very typical of what you see in what's called the heraldic tradition. That is, coats of arms, originally of noble families. And then later in time, you have prominent people, who made money in the world of business or whatever, who also have adopted these coats of arms. Well, here in the United States, we don't have a royal family. We have Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Well, anyway, on a more serious note, shortly after this country was founded, Congress embarked on a program to create an emblem to represent the new country. And here we have that emblem. It's called the Great Seal of the United States. And you see there are a lot of symbols there. There's the eagle in the middle, there's sort of a cloud above, a shield, a branch of some kind of plant, and some arrows or other kind of weapon there. I won't go into the details here. I'm going to save that for later. Governments also have flags. Flags are symbols of national identity. On the left, we have the Union Jack. On the right, we have the stars and the stripes. Very symbolically meaningful for a lot of people. And here we have corporate symbols. The prime example is the logo. For many decades, we have had a proliferation of corporate logos. Here we have some on the more abstract side, immediately recognizable, the swoosh, the apple, and the golden arches. But some companies, instead of having these abstract symbols, they have a stylized version of their name as their logo. Here are three, again, immediately recognizable. But it's not just business corporations that have logos. Other organizations have logos. The interlocking rings, the Olympics, the Red Cross, NASA, the Marines. Next, we have the logos of sports teams. I'm going to focus here on professional sports. You see a list of the major leagues there, and on the right, you see the logos of the teams that have won these leagues' most recent final playoffs. The Denver Nuggets, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Columbus Crew, the Las Vegas Aces, the New Jersey and New York Gotham FC, and the Texas Rangers. And as we all know, uh, college teams and high school teams also have their logos. And all of these, or almost all of them, is not just the logos on helmets and jerseys and around the stadiums and all, but all, or if almost all of these teams, they sell memorabilia with their logos on the memorabilia, such as caps and shirts and jackets and pennants and mugs and all the rest of the merch. Here's an example of that. Here's a sports fan wearing a sweatshirt with a logo. Well, we know who this is, and we know what her favorite team is. I've talked about symbols. Now I want to talk about money. Here's a definition of money. Money is any item or verifiable record that is generally accepted as payment for goods and services and the repayment of debts. By item, they mean something tangible like a piece of metal or a piece of paper. By verifiable record, they're referring to essentially computer entries. Money has several functions. I'm going to talk about two that are most sort of most noticeable to ordinary people. The first is money as a store of value. We talk about having money in the bank. We talk about money in a retirement account. Well, money is not the only store of value. Some people have real estate. Some people have fine art. Some people have precious metals. Another function of money is as a medium of exchange. People work for a company or other organization. In exchange for the services that they provide, the employer pays them money. Common life, you go to the grocery store, you get some items. There at the checkout, you pay money in exchange for receiving those goods at the grocery store. Very simple and straightforward. Money as a medium of exchange. Well, you know the old saying, money doesn't grow on trees. Money just didn't spring out of nowhere. Money was invented by people. And the first thing that comes out of a lot of reading about the origin of money is the Kingdom of Lydia. The Kingdom of Lydia was located in what is now central and western Turkey, and it existed over 2,500 years ago. A prominent person in the Kingdom of Lydia was one of its kings. In fact, I think it was the last king. His name was Croesus. He reigned over 2,500 years ago. You might recognize the name. He was apparently very rich, so his name has given rise to the expression as rich as Croesus. Well, the Lydians generally, and Croesus specifically, are often attributed with the invention of money as we know it. I think the more you read, the real history is more nuanced. Before them and before him, there were various things that were like money, or maybe some people would even call them money. But whatever the long history of this, if the Lydians didn't actually invent money, they're the ones who generally get the credit for it. Croesus is well known in the realm of numismatics for having had these coins minted that are pictured here. Some were made of gold and some were made of silver. They're called Cresids, named after him. And one apparent innovation of these coins implemented by Croesus was that their metal was of a standardized purity and their weight was standardized, so that in the marketplace, people could readily rely on the value of the coin without having to worry about, well, okay, it has a nominal value of this, but is it really worth that? Has the metal been, turned into some sort of alloy, or have people sort of shaved the edges so that it doesn't really weigh what it's supposed to? And these kinds of factors. Well, symbols on money. Look at, well, each of these coins has the same symbols on it. There is the image of a lion and the symbol of a bull. Well, a lion is a famous symbol. The general view of lions is that they symbolize majesty, courage, justice, and strength. The general view about bulls is that they symbolize strength and power. So here we have these images on the coins, probably representing attributes of King Croesus. The back of the coin, there are these sort of holes that have box shapes. I don't think there's any symbolic value there. I think this is a physical artifact of producing the coins. Next to Lydia, geographically, was the world of ancient Greece. The Greeks and the Lydians had many dealings with one another, and the Greeks knew what was going on in Lydia. And with this development of these coins under the reign of Croesus, the Greeks took notice, particularly those in Athens, which was a prominent, if not the most prominent, cultural center of ancient Greece. So the Athenians started producing coins. This one, the tetradrachm, is probably the most iconic. It was first minted over 2,400 years ago and produced for a number of centuries. It shows Athena on the obverse, that's the technical term for the front of a coin, and an owl on the reverse, the backside. Athena is the patron goddess of Athens and the goddess of wisdom, and the owl is accompanied by an olive branch and the Greek letters Alpha, Theta, Epsilon, which is an abbreviation of a Greek word meaning of the Athenians. So, this is an example, if not the prime example, of a coin minted in ancient Greece, and there are the symbols, a goddess and the owl. If you're interested in the significance of owls, in a previous presentation, I wrote about owls as cultural and collegiate symbols. I have a reference to that at the end of this presentation. Moving forward in time and further west, we come to ancient Rome. Here are some scenes, monuments or remnants of monuments from that era around 2,000 years ago. The Roman Republic started minting coins around 2,300 years ago. These coins mostly depicted mythical scenes or portraits of divinities, and if people were portrayed, it was mostly images of ancestors. But over the course of time, the Roman Republic developed problems and a fair amount of turmoil ensued. Finally, in 49 BC, Julius Caesar took control of the government, and the practice developed to put his image on coins. Julius Caesar had been a successful general. You sometimes read that this practice of putting the image of a living ruler on a coin was a major innovation during the tenure of Julius Caesar. The truth is more nuanced. Here I have a quotation from a scholar who has recently written this. The appearance of Caesar's portrait on Roman denarii in 44 BC is often seen as a revolutionary moment in Roman history. But coins had depicted living Romans before. The author gives two examples. I'm going to call them X and Y. And she introduces her mention of these two examples by saying, notably, there were X and Y. Well, that means there were others, but she is just citing these two as the ones she views as most prominent. She goes on to say, Caesar's appearance on denarii is the culmination of these earlier developments. It's sort of like what Croesus did in Lydia. What he did was the culmination of earlier developments. Anyway, back in Rome, one must then question the extent to which contemporary Romans deemed Caesar's portrait on coinage revolutionary. As an example of what that author was talking about, look at this coin featuring Julius Caesar. You see, it's bright and shiny. There on the front, the obverse, there is the image of Julius Caesar. There's his name or title, Caesar. On the back, the reverse, the letters are the name of someone called a moneyer. That is the person who produced the coin. M stands for Marcus and then Medius. So his name was Marcus Medius. He was a supporter of Caesar's, and his name appears on a lot of coins. The image there on the back is the goddess Venus. She's holding a scepter, and in her right hand, she's holding an item that symbolizes victory. So here is the symbolism on this coin. There's the image of the living ruler, and on the back, the goddess Venus. Well, Caesar had a particular relationship with this goddess. He claimed that the goddess Venus was his ancestor. And in fact, he built and dedicated a temple to Venus. Well, as we know, in the year 44, Julius Caesar was assassinated, and further turmoil ensued for quite a number of years. But then in 27, Julius Caesar's great nephew and adoptive son, Octavian, took control of the government. He started calling himself Augustus, and he proclaimed himself emperor. This put the nail in the coffin of the Roman Republic and was the start of the Roman Empire. Augustus continued Julius's practice of minting coins with an image of the current living ruler. Here's an example. There on the obverse is the image of Augustus. And in case you don't recognize who this is, there is his name printed there in Roman letters that people today can readily read, Kaiser Augustus. And there on the reverse is a very interesting symbol. There's sort of like a button in the middle and these spikes that seem to radiate from the button. And the top spike, the one there at the 12 o'clock position, has wavy lines on each side. Well, this is an image of a comet. 4 months after Julius Caesar died, there appeared in the skies of Rome a comet. Reports are that it was so bright that people could even see it during the day. And people took it as a sign from the gods that Julius Caesar himself was a god. 2 years later, the Senate posthumously deified Julius Caesar. So he was then officially in Roman culture and religion a god. And he became known as Divus Iulius. Those are the words that are written there on the reverse of this coin. It's kind of funny. The second word should have an S at the end. It should be Iulius, the man's name. But apparently the engraver ran out of room, so the S is missing. Anyway, Divus means divine. Augustus thought very highly of Julius. As I said, Julius was Augustus's great uncle and adoptive father. This coin was minted around 19 or the year 18. So much for Roman coins. Many of them have survived. There have been a lot of scholars who've analyzed these. It's an interesting subject if you want to pursue it. Moving forward many centuries and to another place in the European area, we come to Great Britain. Here is what one history of British coins says, quote, in 973 AD, Edgar became the first king of a united England. Every new coin in England was issued in his name. Each coin consisted of the king's portrait with the title Rex Anglorum, or King of the English, on the obverse. Most coins minted in England followed this basic design until long afterwards, unquote. Skipping many centuries, we come to a modern British coin. There on the obverse, we have an image of Queen Elizabeth. We have the denomination, 10 pounds, the Queen's name, and a Latin abbreviation at the bottom. It stands for Dei Gratia Regina Fidei Defensor, which means, by the grace of God, Queen, defender of the faith. On the reverse, we have a reduced version of the coat of arms of the royal family, which we saw before. There's the shield with the crown above it. Instead of the lion and the unicorn, we have these branches of plants. I'm not sure what they are, but we have the word Her Majesty the Queen's Sapphire Jubilee, 1952 to 2017. Notice that the British, starting in 973 and continuing today, on their currency, they put an image of the living ruler, just like the Roman Empire. Here we come to the subject of paper money, technically known as banknotes. Paper money that resembles modern banknotes was used in China during the Song Dynasty around 800 and more years ago. This concept was introduced to Europe by Marco Polo during the Yuan Dynasty 700 and more years ago. Marco Polo was an interesting man. He was a citizen of Venice. He traveled to China and back. His journey was over 20 years. Marco Polo published an account of his journey, commonly referred to as his travels. He described how the Chinese made paper from mulberry bark and authenticated it as money. He reported that this paper currency was widely circulated and required to be accepted as payment. Now, scholars have analyzed Marco Polo's travels intensively, and there have been questions raised as to the authenticity and veracity of his accounts. But with regard to paper currency in China, the most reliable recent view is that his report is accurate. On a related point, it's hard to find good images of ancient Chinese paper currency. Just imagine it was made, on this mulberry bark, and we're talking about something that would have had to survive for 700 years or more. The few images that I've seen are very faint, but I have read that some of them have on them images of dragons. As you may know, the dragon is an important cultural symbol in China. It represents good fortune, imperial power, and nobility. In Europe, the first banknotes were issued in Sweden in 1661. This process lasted for 3 years until the issuing bank went bust. But the idea was noticed and caught on. The Bank of England started the permanent issue of banknotes in 1695, and the process has continued. And so we're now going to look at a modern British banknote. There on the obverse, again, is the image of the Queen. There in the lower left is a sort of diamond-shaped figure. It has the letters ER, which are a Latin abbreviation, Elizabeth Regina, Elizabeth the Queen. And there between the two letters is the Roman numeral 2. She's the second Elizabeth. There to the left is that sort of blue image. I can't exactly tell what it is, but it looks like an image of a precious stone, and it might be an anti-counterfeiting device. Well, it says Bank of England. All right, that's the issuing bank, and the denomination, £10. On the reverse of British currency, they often portray an important historical figure. In this case, it's Charles Darwin. And there in the middle is the image of the ocean with a ship. It could well represent the ship that Darwin used to go around the world to make his observations that led to the theory of evolution. There on the left is a hummingbird, some flowers, and a mirror. I'm not sure what those symbolize, but the oval there in the center, there's some words around it. It says, the governor and company of the Bank of England, and then it has the date 2000. And of course, there's the name of the bank and the denomination, £10. Well, those are examples of currency in Great Britain. We move to the United States of America, starting with the 13 original states. And we're first going to talk about the coins issued by the United States of America. One of the first things that Congress did when the government was formed under the current Constitution was to pass the Coinage Act of 1792. By this act, Congress established a mint and authorized the production of coins. Until then, various coins had circulated, British coins, Spanish coins, and maybe others. So Congress authorized a new currency. The basic unit, the dollar, and it was divided into 100 cents. Cent coming from the Latin word centum, meaning 100. Now, this was an innovation. The United States was the first country in the world to create a fully decimalized currency. For example, it took Great Britain until 1971 to move away from their arcane and antique system of currency to a decimal system. Well, let's look. I won't go through all the history here, but let's look at today's coins in the United States. The 1 cent coin, the penny, the obverse has the image of Lincoln. The reverse, for many years, had an image of the Lincoln Memorial. But in the last several years, the mint on the reverse has put what's called the Union Shield. It's a simple shield that has 13 vertical stripes, 13 obviously referring to the 13 original states. And at the top of the shield, it has the legend, A pluribus unum, Latin meaning from many, one, that is, one nation formed from a number of states. People did and may still view A pluribus unum as the motto of the United States. For a long time, it was sort of a de facto motto, even though never an official motto. And then in 1956, Congress decided that the official motto of the United States was going to be In God We Trust. But you see both of these legends, A pluribus unum and In God We Trust. The 5 cent coin, the nickel, has an image of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Jefferson's home, Monticello, on the reverse. Jefferson was a man with many interests, and one of them was architecture. So he designed and had built this very interesting and beautiful home there in Charlottesville. It's now a museum. It's been very well restored, and it's a fascinating place to visit. Then the 10-cent piece, the dime. It has an image of Franklin Roosevelt on the obverse, and the reverse is different from most of our other coins. In the center of the reverse is a torch, which symbolizes liberty. Then to one side of the torch is an oak branch, symbolizing strength. The other side, there's an olive branch, symbolizing peace. Well, this coin has a story. Our modern dime was first minted in 1946, the year after Roosevelt died. As a young man, he developed a serious illness that was diagnosed as polio. His legs became paralyzed, and he became a proponent of dealing with polio. In 1938, he founded an organization which came to be known as the March of Dimes, which was to raise money to get people to turn in their dimes to support research and help people who had contracted this disease. So that's the story behind Roosevelt on the dime. The 25-cent coin, the quarter, has George Washington on the obverse. And over the course of time, there have been various symbols on the reverse, but today the most common ones you see, there are 50 different ones, each one representing one of the 50 states. The 50-cent coin, there's an interesting story here, known as the 50-cent piece, was once common. When I was growing up, 50-cent pieces were extremely common in circulation. They fell out of favor for quite a while, but here recently the Treasury has been putting large numbers of them in circulation again. I don't know, maybe it's inflation, maybe a quarter doesn't buy much anymore, but a 50-cent piece does. Anyway, on the obverse is John Kennedy. On the reverse is the Great Seal of the United States. We saw that before, the eagle with those other symbols. Then there's the $1 coin, the silver dollar. These are effectively not in circulation anymore. The Treasury still produces them as collector's items. They used to have the image of Dwight Eisenhower, but the Treasury uh, at one point put the image of Susan B. Anthony. She lived in the 19th century. She was a prominent leader for women's rights, particularly getting women the right to vote. And then the Treasury has put the image of Sacagawea on the front, the obverse of the $1 coin. Sacagawea was a Native American woman who helped Lewis and Clark in their expedition to the Pacific Northwest. The Treasury has also minted $1 coins with the images of various deceased presidents. And on the reverse, the $1 coin has variously had the eagle, we talked about that, and the Liberty Bell and the Statue of Liberty, all very familiar. So those are our coins. Let's talk about American banknotes. At the beginning of this country, paper currency was known because the Bank of England had been issuing it for a long time. But Americans were skeptical of paper currency, especially the idea of the federal government issuing it. The subject was very controversial for a long time. But because paper money has its convenience, I mean, as society developed, as commercial transactions get larger, think of trying to settle a commercial transaction using coins. Well, it just doesn't work. So, what happened in this country was it wasn't the federal government for a long time, but it was commercial banks that each issued their own banknotes. And those banknotes were only as good as the solidity of the individual banks that were issuing the notes. Finally, in 1862, the federal government started issuing banknotes as a way to finance the Civil War. And so today we have paper currency still, and they are now issued by the Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve System was established by Congress in 1913 and started operating in 1914. Some people think of it as a unified bank, that big building there in Washington, D.C., but in fact, it's a system of banks. There are regional banks, each of which has its own activities to some extent, but coordinated by the headquarters there in Washington, D.C. For example, in this region, this part of the United States, the regional Federal Reserve Bank is based in Dallas. Here in Houston, where I live, we have a large branch of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. Well, let's look first at the $1 banknote. It is full of symbolism. There on the obverse, we have the portrait of George Washington. instantly recognizable. To the right, we have a seal. It's the seal of the U.S. Treasury. There is a shield there with balance scales. Those symbolize equality and justice. We have a chevron there in the middle with 13 stars. Those refer to the 13 original states. And there underneath the chevron, we have a key. A key symbolizes opening and closing, knowledge, and expertise. To the left of Washington's portrait, we have a seal with the letter B. This is specific to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That was one of the regional reserve banks that actually issued this banknote. And there it has the name of the country, and it has the denomination and signatures authenticating. And now let's look at the reverse of the $1 bill. Lots of symbols. Let's start there on the right with the Great Seal of the United States. We mentioned that before, displayed it before, but here I want to go into the details. There's the eagle there in the middle. Our founders were greatly influenced in many ways by ancient Rome, and the eagle was an important figure, an important symbol in ancient Rome, referring to victory, pride, and power. So our founders took that over as a symbol of the United States. Above the eagle is, it looks like a cloud with 13 stars, the 13 original states. In front of the eagle is a shield. Shields are common symbols. They can mean protection, identity, and status. The shield has 13 stripes. There's 13 again. In its right talon, the eagle is holding an olive branch with 13 leaves, signifying a preference for peace. In its left talon, the eagle is holding 13 arrows, symbolizing a readiness to go to war. There in the middle, we have the official motto of the country, "In God We Trust." We have the denomination there in different places. And to the left is a fascinating figure. In fact, it is the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States. The Great Seal is not just that image there on the right with the eagle, but it's two-sided. So here on the left, we have the reverse. The most prominent figure there is part of a pyramid, an unfinished pyramid. Pyramids generally symbolize strength and longevity. The fact that it's unfinished means that the founders, well, first of all, it has 13 rows of stones, 13 again. The fact that it's unfinished meant to the founders that they thought that the 13 original states were the beginning of more to come. The bottom row of the pyramid has the Roman letters M, D, C, C, L, X, X, V, I. That is the Roman numerals for 1776, which was the year of the Declaration of Independence. Above this unfinished pyramid is an eye with a sort of halo or light effect around it. The eye in this context is a symbol of what many of the founders called providence. Some of the founders of this country were not traditional followers of religion. Rather, they believed in some sort of divine force or divine power that they called Providence, and that's its symbol. Then we have this legend in Latin above the eye, annuit coiptes. This literally means, well, the verb there comes from the Latin verb annuo, which literally means to nod towards, but figuratively it means to approve. Coiptes means beginnings or undertakings. Now, Latin is a terse language. You have to supply some elements to translate it into modern English. So, here in the context, the usual translation of that legend is Providence has approved our undertakings. This was the belief of the founders, that Providence has approved their act of starting a new country. The legend under the pyramid, again in Latin, Novus Ordo Seclorum, means a new order of the ages. Again, the founders believe that they were starting something new and different. Well, it's interesting. The $1 bill has all this symbolism. What can you get for a dollar anymore? Well, I'm not sure, but it's the whole thing is a fascinating story and very rich in symbolism on money. Let's look at other American banknotes, starting with the $2 bill. I haven't seen a $2 bill in a very long time, and I hadn't really thought about it until working on this presentation. And I've read that $2 bills are theoretically still in circulation and still legal tender, but effectively no longer in circulation because they've been hoarded by collectors. Collectors think that they're worth more than the $2 face value. Anyway, the obverse of the $2 bill has Thomas Jefferson, and the reverse has a reproduction of a painting done by a man named Trumbull. And the scene is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. They're in Independence Hall, the founders sitting around a table on July 4th, 1776, performing that act. The $5 banknote, we see a lot of those. Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. The $10 bill, Alexander Hamilton on the obverse. He was the first Secretary of the Treasury. And the reverse has an image of the U.S. Treasury building. The $20 bill, former President Andrew Jackson on the obverse and the White House on the back. The $50 bill, Ulysses S. Grant's image is on the obverse, and an image of the U.S. Capitol on the back. And the $100 bill, image of Benjamin Franklin on the obverse, which is given the nickname to that banknote as a Benjamin. And the reverse has an image of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. So those are our banknotes. And here I have an aside. The paper on which these banknotes are printed, well, and also the $1 banknote, that paper is made by a company named Crane. And Crane has produced paper for the U.S. Treasury since 1879. It's a fascinating story. That company was founded in 1801, located in Dalton, Massachusetts, in western Massachusetts. It was located there because in those days, one major source of energy was water power. And there are these streams there that have maybe not waterfalls, but they have enough, I'm not sure what the technical word is, depth of moving down the water so that you can harness that power. At that point, steam power was only then beginning, and it was decades before electric power was available. So people used this water power to run mills, including a paper mill. The currency paper that the Crane Company produces is not ordinary paper made from wood pulp. Rather, it's made 75% cotton and 25% linen. And in recent decades, working with the Treasury, they have put special anti counterfeiting elements into the paper. It's especially noticeable in the $100 bill. There is the strip of something, I think it's mylar, that is supposed to resist counterfeiting. This company, Crane, you may have heard their name. Not only do they produce the paper for the US Treasury, but they produce other kinds of paper, including stationery. And a lot of people will buy Crane stationery for special purposes like printing wedding invitations. It's very nice stationery. Recently, the company has split so that there's a separate company named Crane that produces the paper for the Treasury, and there's another company that makes stationery. And for a while, they were producing other kinds of specialty paper, but I don't know how all that is played out. Around 13 years ago, I was in Western Massachusetts to attend the wedding of a friend, and I went to Dalton and I visited that company. They had a museum there called the Crane Museum of Papermaking. It's a fascinating place. I read recently on their website that the museum is closed for the time being, but they indicate that they want to reopen it. So if they reopen it, it's a really interesting place to visit. Well, that's the aside about Crane and making the paper for American currency. Well, American currency has images of presidents and a couple of other famous people from the early days of our country. What does it mean to put the image of somebody like this on currency? I think we're doing that person an honor. We are honoring service. We are honoring leadership. We are honoring contributions. And in effect, we're making that person a symbol of our country. Well, let's look a bit at the background, the backgrounds of these leaders. There are some interesting points here. George Washington, the first president. Well, among other things, he was a third generation slave owner. In his will, there are lengthy and detailed provisions about what he wants to have done with these slaves after he dies. In his will, he provides that one of these slaves is going to be freed, but the others are continue working for his widow, Martha, as long as she lives. And exactly how that played out is a long and complicated story that you can read about. Thomas Jefferson, who was one of the founders and another president, owned over 600 slaves. In his will, he set several free, but the others were retained in bondage, effectively in economic terms, as stores of value. Because when he died, he was heavily in debt, and he wanted those slaves to be sold to settle his debts. Andrew Jackson, a prominent general, and then became president. During his lifetime, he owned over 300 slaves. But beyond that, when he was president in 1830, he signed a measure passed by Congress called the Indian Removal Act. Well, the background of this was in the southeastern United States, there were a number of tribes of Native Americans who lived there, who had been living there for, a really long time. But that area became a popular destination for lots of European settlers. And so conflicts arose between the Native Americans and the European settlers. And the purpose of this act was to put an end to those conflicts. And what they decided to do was to have the federal government negotiate with each tribe to have the tribe give up its ancestral lands to be available to the European settlers. And the Native Americans would then move west of the Mississippi, basically to what is now Oklahoma, which is sort of the origin of all the Native Americans, not all or almost all, the Native Americans in Oklahoma. Well, the process was difficult. Um, there were all kinds of problems, and no surprise, who had the upper hand in the negotiations? Well, it wasn't the Native Americans. In the end, around 70,000 Native Americans gave up their ancestral lands and moved westward. It was a tough journey. Many died. It came to be known as the Trail of Tears. Some years back, an effort was begun to replace the image of Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill with the image of Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was born a slave in Maryland. She escaped. She went back to rescue some friends and family members. So she was quite a figure in that effort and the Underground Railroad. She was also active in her later years in pursuing rights for women, especially the right to vote. She lived over 90 years in the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century. Well, this effort to put her image on the $20 bill has encountered a number of delays. I read recently that it might not happen until 2030. Abraham Lincoln, viewed almost as a saint, the president who led the Union during the Civil War and reestablished the Union and was assassinated. You read about Lincoln's earlier years, he made some statements about the relationships between white people and black people that, if uttered today, would cause shock and outrage. But anyway, he's venerated for his accomplishments. Ulysses S. Grant was a famous general. He was the general who led the Union forces to victory in the Civil War. He was then elected president. His term as president had a lot of controversies and problems. He himself seems to have been competent and honest and tried to do the best. Views about him have changed over the years. The most recent evaluations are mostly even, acknowledging the problems during his administration. The evaluations are mostly positive. Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy, more recent presidents. FDR, of course, has had many admirers. He's had detractors. He and his administration have been widely evaluated and reevaluated, particularly the role during the Great Depression. Well, anyway, and then there's John Kennedy. Also, many admirers, but also people who were skeptics and detractors. Benjamin Franklin, his family owned some slaves, but later in life, he became opposed to slavery. When he died, he didn't own any slaves, but he was a prominent public servant. He was ambassador. He was the first postmaster general. He made many contributions to the early years of our country, and he made contribution contributions in the area of science, particularly the early study of electricity. He, I read one funny thing. Uh, one scholar said he was the best president of the United States who was never president of the United States. Alexander Hamilton, first Secretary of the Treasury. He has a reputation of being smart, competent, and forward thinking. He did a lot to establish the early sort of basic, I'll say, economic system of the country. His views and his tenure, not free from controversy. Anybody who's a major public figure is just going to have to deal with controversy. But on the whole, he has a positive reputation. And not only that, he's the subject of this very prominent and famous Broadway musical, Hamilton. Well, there they are, the people on American currency, the symbols of the country. And there are some things about their backgrounds that I think are interesting in this context. All of these individuals dealt with difficult and controversial issues. That was just part of their job as senior public officials. And like a lot of us, many of these individuals didn't have a single facet to themselves. Instead, they had more than one facet. A number of them had conflicting thoughts, a number of them took conflicting actions. And we have to ask ourselves, to what extent should we judge the past by the standards of the present? I don't offer an answer, but it's an important point to think about. Another point is, from what I can tell, the United States has never put the image of a living person on currency. In that regard, we have been like the Roman Republic, which took that same practice. Unlike the practice of the Roman Empire and Great Britain, which had the practice, and in terms of Great Britain, still had the practice of putting images of living rulers on their currency. What about cash today? I want to talk briefly about this. Sweden took action last year to abolish cash. Cash is no longer acceptable as a means of payment in Sweden. Canada has taken steps to simplify its currency. They have abolished the 1 cent coin, the penny. Prices are rounded to the nearest 5 cents. They have also abolished the $1 bill, and instead they have a $1 coin, which is supposed to be better. Well, what about the United States? I haven't taken a survey or done much research, but I'm just going to share my life with cash. I use very little cash anymore. When I make a small purchase, like buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks, I use cash. The farmer's market I go to, a number of the vendors accept only cash. Other vendors accept cash only for smaller amounts. For larger amounts, they will accept either cash or a card. Well, okay, that's me. We are all probably aware that beyond our lives, there's a significant world out there in the United States, a sort of underground economy that relies to a large extent on cash. So I think in this country, trying to go cashless, there would be some opposition. And of course, trying to simplify our currency, think of the hue and the cry that would arise if, like Canada, we tried to abolish the penny. Well, anyway, there we are. Well, what about money today generally? If we use cash to a limited extent, what's going on? Our money is mostly in the form of computer entries. So we have these electronic payment systems. The first, checks, is a hybrid. I rarely write checks and I rarely receive checks. I think most recently the check I got was from an insurance company. It arrived in paper form in US mail. In the past, I would have gotten in my car and driven to the bank and deposited the check physically. But now my bank has an app. I have it on my phone. I can just touch that app, and with my phone, I take photos of the check, the front and the back, and go to the app. And with a couple of thumb strokes, I deposit the check electronically. Then there's the system called ACH, which stands for Automated Clearinghouse. Most people, if not almost all people, are the beneficiaries of this. If you work for a company or other organization, you probably don't get a paycheck anymore. That's a old fashioned means of paying an employee. Rather, you get your pay twice a month electronically. Your employer's bank deposits the funds electronically in your bank account using this system called ACH, which is run by the banks. If you have your utility payments every month made electronically by your bank, that ACH is the system they use for direct debits to people's bank accounts. The government also uses ACH for payments like Social Security by direct credits to bank accounts. Then there are credit and debit cards. I don't need to say anything about those. Everybody knows what they are, if not exactly how they work, but it's electronic. And then we have what I call, and then there are Venmo and Zelle. These are ways that you can use to transfer money directly from your bank account to somebody else's bank account. And some small businesses and professional firms also accept these means as a way of being paid for the services that they provide. Well, then we have cryptocurrency. I don't know much about it. I don't have any economic stake in any of the many cryptocurrencies. It's all electronic. There's no governments involved. The government doesn't issue cryptocurrency. The government doesn't manage the system. It's all privately done. It seems to have, talk about functions of money, seems to have three functions that I can see. One is, I think you can, some people will accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment. So it's a medium of exchange. For some people, it seems to be maybe an investment, so maybe a store of value. But to a certain extent, it seems to be a speculative toy. Well, electronic money. Well, this electronic money, what are its visual manifestations? In the world of traditional currency, we saw symbols of rulers and political leaders. We've seen various things, government buildings, important people, various symbols like torches and eagles and all of that. Well, the visual presentation of modern money has gotten away from all of that. You don't see any image of any government or any government agency or any political leader at all in modern electronic money. For example, if I go to my phone and make a payment using Venmo, what I see on the screen of my phone is Venmo's logo, the blue rounded square with the stylized letter V. If I use a debit card, here is a form of debit card. What does it have on it? In the upper left is the logo of a bank, Amerant Bank. I call it a logo rather than a name because the letters A are stylized. They don't have the usual crossbar of the letter A. Well, there's the chip. In the lower right is the logo of MasterCard. MasterCard was formed as a consortium owned by a large number of banks to effect payment. It then became a separate company. It's now a separate corporation. It calls itself a payment technology company. Well, that's its logo. And this is just a blank form of debit card. A real debit card there in the middle has the name of the account holder at the bank. It has the holder's bank account number and it has the expiration date. But there, you don't see any visual symbol of a government agency, a political leader, or anything. It's all logos. All right, let's recap the history of symbols on money, or at least this brief overview that I have presented. We started with metal coins, and we started in Lydia. The symbols were on the coins were important animals, the lion and the bull. Moved to ancient Athens, we saw the image of a goddess. We moved to Rome, we saw images of emperors. We moved to Great Britain, kings and queens. In the United States, presidents. On paper currency in Great Britain, we see kings and queens. In the United States, we see presidents and other important figures. And today, in the electronic world, we see corporate logos. Those are the facts. I will let you draw your own conclusions. Here I have some selected references if you're interested in pursuing these topics. Here is information you can use to contact me if you have questions or comments or other communications. Here is a list of my previous presentations. The last one on the list, owls as cultural and collegiate symbols, I referred to earlier in this presentation. Well, thank you for joining me, and goodbye.